Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today we have an extensive exclusive interview from Thailand with Dr. Marc Faber, publisher of the Gloom Boom Doom Report. He talks about the effort to return to a so-called normal economy, inflation, interest rates, how governments mislead people, the US dollar, crude oil, vaccine passports, electric vehicles, and the horrible health effects still being seen by the Agent Orange sprayed during the Vietnam War. Plus, at the end of the show, we'll have a company showcase update from American Manganese President Larry Reaugh. We'll talk to Marc Faber right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Reaugh, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Marc Faber. He's the editor and publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report online at gloomboomdoom.com. He's speaking to us from Chiang Mai, Thailand. Marc, welcome back to This Week in Money.
Yes, how are you?
We're doing great in Vancouver. How are things in Thailand?
Yeah, everything is fine. I think that they realize that the lockdowns are basically not working well and that people need to earn some money, and so I think they gradually reopen the economy somewhat, but I think that it will take a while until tourism comes back.
Mm-hmm. So what's the latest with the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report?
What's the latest theme? Well, I think the latest theme, the one that I've been talking about for a long time, is that the move towards socialism and interventionism by government simply doesn't work economically, and that free market and capitalistic system are obviously a superior alternatives than government interventions and moves to the left, politically seen.
If someone wants to subscribe to the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report, how can they do it?
Well, you can go to the website gloomboomdoom.com, and there are the various options.
The Dow hit 36,500 points. What do you see ahead for the Dow?
Well, I think the issue is how high will markets go. I think, and this is known to everybody, that at the present time, U.S. equities are at the highest valuation level ever, whether it's a P/E ratio or a price-to-sales ratio or price-to-book or Q ratio, whatever it is you take, it's at the highest level ever. And so, and we have artificially low interest rates, which in my opinion should be much higher, not a little higher, much higher because of the existing inflation. So I think the outlook is not particularly favorable.
Is that the same story for the S&P, which hit 4,700 plus?
Yeah, the same applies to the S&P, whereby I think that the S&P and especially the Nasdaq and Russell 2000 are more vulnerable than the Dow because they contain the stocks that have become the most popular stocks during this bull market. Either they contain the FANG and the related stocks, or they contain the meme stocks. The meme stocks are mostly companies that have no earnings and no visibility about the future. So they remind me of the concept stocks of the 1960s. And the concept stocks in the 60s, in the 69-70 bear market, they went down by 90%. And I would expect the same from the meme stocks.
Well, I just saw a report on GameStop, and yes, they had horrible losses in the third quarter.
Yeah, most of these companies will have poor earnings, undoubtedly. And a lot of these companies, they will also be under increasing competition. I mean, if you look at Tesla, every major automobile manufacturer in the world will make similar cars, and probably of much better quality.
Is inflation the elephant in the room?
Well, let's put it this way. In Europe, we have on government bonds 10 years next to zero interest rates and some negative interest rates like in Switzerland. In the US, the 10 years note is selling at a yield of 1.5% or thereabouts. And your inflation and my inflation, depending on the basket of goods you and I buy, and depending on how many children and wives, etc., we have, the rate of inflation will be between 5% to, say, 12%. If the price deflator or consumer price index in the U.S. was calculated according to the methodology that they used before the 1970s, then the rate of inflation would be 12%. As it is around 5.4%. But regardless how you slice it, we have record high negative real rates of interest. In other words, you have an inflation of 6%. Your government bonds yield 1.5%. The negative interest is 4.5%. And that is essentially an expropriation of people's money if they keep it on deposit. Under normal circumstances, under a free market, the rate of interest on 10-year bonds would be at 6% or 7%, but not at 1.5%. This is a manipulation by the Federal Reserve.
Are some products seeing hyperinflation?
Yes, possible that it will happen. I don't think that if you think it through, the Fed will increase interest rates to 6% within the next 12 months. And as long as the rate of consumer price increases is higher than the rate of interest, inflation will accelerate.
How destructive can continued money printing be?
Well, for some people, it's not destructive, as we've seen. People who own shares and real estate and certain commodities and so forth, and art and bitcoins, in the inflation has been good, the monetary inflation and the printing of money. But for 90% of the population, it is bad. But the Federal Reserve is such a liar. It's actually a criminal organization. And they keep on repeating stories that, yeah, we have inflation because of COVID and so forth and so on. They keep on lying and misleading the public. And the public is not educated in economics. They're educated to watch football games and so forth. So they believe what they read in the media. And the media is in essentially acting in concert with the Federal Reserve and with the government. So you have a situation where people are being misled, but actually they lose both their wages and their assets have increased at a slower rate than the rate of inflation, period.
People keep on calling on governments to do something about inflation. Can they?
You can do something about inflation, of course, but it involves some pain. As I just said, it would involve increasing interest rates in the U.S. at least to 7%. That, in my opinion, the Fed will not do.
The U.S. dollar continues to inch higher. Do you see a strong U.S. dollar going forward?
No, but I agree with you. The US dollar has surprised a lot of people on the upside, as well as the Chinese RMB and the Hong Kong dollar. These were the two currencies that people were keenest to short, and both have gone up against the US dollar. These are two currencies that are exceptional in the world, in the sense that they've been strong against the US dollar, not by much, by 2%. But given that people were bashing the Chinese RMB and the Hong Kong dollar, it is actually quite amusing.
The bond market and interest rates, what do you see ahead?
I think interest rates will go up, but slowly, and as we've seen, central banks can manipulate bonds in the sense that they can buy essentially the entire bond market through quantitative easing. In other words, they go into the market and buy all the bonds that the Treasury Department issues.
Could real estate bubbles around the world lead to deflation?
Yes, if they burst. But as I just explained, I do not believe that the Federal Reserve or the ECB will increase interest rates meaningfully.
Could hyperinflation stave off deflation?
Every inflation eventually leads to deflation. But the timing is important. You understand? In theory, we could have very high inflation rates for the next 2-3 years before there is a breakdown. And we also have to define the breakdown. If you keep on printing money, you can print money for a long time. Then the deflation will occur against assets which you cannot print. In other words, the currency will lose its value, its purchasing power, against anything that you cannot print. You cannot print real estate, you cannot print bitcoins, you cannot print gold, you cannot print silver, and so forth. You cannot print more Rembrandts. So this is a possibility that they keep on printing money, and that money becomes worthless.
Gold continues to be in a trading range. Is gold likely to break out of that range anytime soon?
Yes, I think it will break out. The question up or down. In general, I think it should break out on the upside, but it could trade sideways and then break down for a while, for maybe a month or two, before we reach a healthy bottom. A healthy bottom would be a bottom where people are very bearish about precious metals. That hasn't occurred yet. They're not bullish. The small investors or traders in the commodity markets, they're not very bullish about gold and silver, but they're not outright bearish.
Silver also continues to be in a trading range. Could silver break out of that range?
Yes, also maybe first on the downside before we have a tradable and attractive bottom. So, of course, long term, I'm in favor of gold and silver and think and believe that as an alternative to cash, US dollars, or any monetary unit, it's superior to own gold and silver and platinum. But near-term movements depend very much on speculators, and speculators this year, they favored cryptocurrencies and meme stocks, and not gold and silver.
Do you think we could see sound money in the future?
Yes, as I explained to you, and as I explained in every time you interview me for the last 5 years, I hold gold and silver because I believe that they will maintain their purchasing power. And I don't only hold them, but I keep on buying them every month. But I also have stocks and real estate and bonds and so forth. It's a question of how much you invest in gold.
We'll have more with Dr. Marc Faber right after this.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Dr. Marc Faber, who's in Thailand. Mark, from the outside looking in, what are your thoughts on Canada?
Well, unfortunately, it's a beautiful country with great people, but unfortunately the great people voted for a horrible government, similar to the government in the U.S. It's hard for me to believe that people can elect such incompetent people.
Well, if you look at the election results, 60% of Canadians voted for somebody else besides the Trudeau Liberals. But it's a parliamentary system, so the people who got the biggest of the small little wedges gets to form a minority government if somebody else props them up. So really, over 60% of Canadians think somebody else should be running the country.
Yeah, it should be 95% who think somebody else should run the country.
Does Canada look like it's being run by the Chinese Communist Party?
No, the Chinese Communist Party is a party of more than 100 million people, most of whom are educated and smart. I can't say that of the U.S. government or of Canada or of any Western democracy. In the governments in the Western democracies, you have the worst type of scums: corrupt, incompetent, and arrogant.
Your thoughts on the Canadian dollar?
Compared to the U.S. dollar, I have a favorable view of the Canadian dollar. But I don't have a favorable view of the Canadian dollar against precious metals.
The price of crude is becoming more volatile. What do you see ahead for oil?
I think we're still in a bull market, or let's say an upward trending market. I think the big fallacy of the climate change fanatics is that the move towards cleaner energy will actually save energy. On the contrary, it will use more fossil fuels. And so the prices of coal, natural gas, and oil, in my opinion, will continue to go up.
President Biden has returned the U.S. to importing oil, whereas President Trump made the U.S. a net exporter of oil. Could this be a case of follow the money?
Well, as I said earlier on, the socialist economy is a disaster, and free markets solve economic problems more efficiently. Now, if you look at the U.S. under Trump, there was very little inflation because he deregulated the U.S. economy to some extent. He's also an interventionist because he's an arrogant, incompetent character without any knowledge. But at least he reduced the number of laws and regulations, which was beneficial for the economy. Biden and his team has to be one of the worst governments the world has seen since Caligula in the Roman Empire, and they consist of people who have no clue about anything, whether it is energy or healthcare. And these people, they intervene in the economy, and as a result of their interventions, they've created massive shortages and bottlenecks and supply chain problems throughout the economic system, which combined with the intervention by the Federal Reserve through money printing has caused inflation to move up.
Agenda 2030, the Great Reset. If you own nothing, would you be happy?
Nobody is happy not to own anything. And the progress of Western civilization has gone hand in hand with property rights. Many economists, even left-leaning economists, when they go to an emerging market or to an emerging economy, they all agree on one thing. Very clearly defined property rights are required to get an economy going and to lead an economy from poverty to prosperity. You take private property away, the property is then owned by the government, by the state. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go and live for a while in Venezuela, go and live for a while in North Korea, and you will see the standards of living. I was lucky because when I was born, there was in Eastern Europe communism. So I went already to communist countries at the age of 10 years. And I know, because I repeatedly went as a ski racer to Eastern Europe, how miserable life is under communism. And if you don't believe it and you can't go to these communist countries, then read about the Bolshevik Revolution. After the communists took over, the industrial production in Russia collapsed by 80%. And after Stalin, with his colleagues in the state office, including Trotsky, who was responsible for the armed forces, after Stalin nationalized the real estate, they took the real estate away from the farmers. There were huge food shortages because if the farmer can't keep what he produces and is taken away by the government, the farmer will say to himself, why the hell do I produce? I just produce less, so I don't produce anything. So the worst that can happen in an economy is that the property rights are violated. Socialists, they don't see that. But Hayek clearly said, and that I agree with, if the socialists understood anything about economics, they wouldn't be socialists.
Do you think Marxism's being successfully implemented around the world?
Well, we had it already, and I can tell you, the countries that were previously communist, whether it's Vietnam, China, or Russia, or the former Soviet Union countries, none of them wants to go back to socialism. And the Davos crowd that calls about the great reset where people don't own anything, I wonder whether that would include them, or whether they would be owners of real estate and of assets, and everybody else has nothing.
Why do you think vaccination passports are being pushed around the world?
Well, you have to ask the deep state. But basically, I think that some people that have power, they think that they should manipulate human beings and maybe reduce the population or whatever. But it's not, something is wrong about it, and something is fishy about this whole COVID expedition that we just experienced. But people seem to be quite happy to get vaccinated. I didn't take any vaccine, but of course I don't work for a big company. And if you work for a big company and you depend on your salary to pay your credit card bills at the end of the month, and the company says, well, if you don't vaccinate yourself, we're going to kick you out, you're dismissed, then what do? You can see that the government and big corporations have a lot of leverage, and not everybody is financially independent and can say, F you, and I don't take the vaccine. But it's quite obvious that the vaccine is of limited use and has had some side effects, and some side effects you may not notice for several years, but it's likely to be negative.
We're hearing death rates around the world are increasing, possibly due to the pandemic, possibly due to injections. If we're experiencing a die-off, what would it mean for economies, markets, and real estate?
Well, I think if the mortality rate goes up and if more and more people pass away, it's obviously not bullish for the economy. And strictly speaking, I can tell you that for 90% of the people in the world, the pandemic has been a disaster in many ways for small businesses, and this is statistically demonstrated that small business suffered, and a lot of small businesses, coffee shops, tattoo salons, hairdressers, and so forth, small businesses, business owners, they were wiped out, and wealthy people made money because they own the shares, they own the properties, they own everything. That was inflated. But nowadays, most people, in real terms, inflation adjusted, their salaries went up a bit, but not as much as their cost of living increases. In other words, the salary increases went up less than the rate of inflation.
Your thoughts on big pharma?
Well, I guess some are very, have no scruples and are dishonest, and others are more honest, but they also engage in practices that are profit-oriented and not necessarily oriented or where the objective is not necessarily healing people at the lowest possible cost. Because if that was the objective, they would have advocated the intake of other drugs than the COVID vaccines that are expensive.
Is Evergrande a threat to world markets?
No, but it is a symptom that the property market in China is at the present time unhealthy, and that it will likely go down further, whereby not all properties will go down, but it's a clear sign there was a speculative bubble driven by excessive credit, and now this bubble is being deflated. It's not a threat to the global economy, and it's not a threat to the Chinese economy, but it has an impact on the valuation of other property stocks in Asia, and notably of property stocks in China.
If real estate falls in China, are the people there likely to sell their foreign real estate holdings?
Not, who knows? You know, some people will say, well, we keep our overseas properties because they will go up, relatively speaking, to the properties in China. And others, they may have emergencies where they have to sell overseas. And maybe the reaction is, oh, properties are bad in China, we put more money into overseas properties. Who knows?
Are cryptocurrencies an investment vehicle or a store of wealth?
I think it's a new asset class that emerged because of excessive money printing. So they just invented a new asset class. And some cryptos will have some value, and 95% will go under and be worthless.
Do you think it's time to break up the mega companies like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft?
Not necessarily, but maybe the government, through regulation and through the influence or under the influence of lobbies, allowed them to become so powerful. So whether they should be broken up or not, that I don't know. But clearly, in a free market economy without intervention, they wouldn't have become this big.
More and more auto manufacturers are coming out with electric vehicles. Is the ability to recycle electric vehicle batteries likely to lead to greater demand for green energy vehicles?
Yes, that is clear. The question is, are they so clean as people believe. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that through this drive to green energy and renewables, etc., they will use much more fossil fuels.
Is it true you should look at your electric car as producing the pollution as the power source? In British Columbia, most of our power comes from hydroelectricity. In China, it's from coal. So in essence, are their electric cars just coal burners?
Yes, what you point out is absolutely true. It depends how you generate the energy for the cars. In Canada, maybe your main source is hydroelectric power, but not in the U.S.
2 words, climate change. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm not a great believer in all these theories, and I think these conferences like they just had in Glasgow are a complete waste of time. If you believe in climate change, address your lifestyle and the ones of your neighbors and try to save that way on usage of energy and on pollution, reduce pollution, and don't fly to a conference in Glasgow with totally 400 private planes. I think we have to be realistic about what can be done, what should be done, and at what cost.
We'll have more with Dr. Marc Faber right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Dr. Marc Faber. What's the likelihood of war ahead?
Well, some of my well-informed friends, and I tend to agree with it, they think that we are already in a war situation and that anything can happen. Maybe it's an accident, maybe a coincidence, maybe a provocation, but the probability of war has increased. And economically speaking, when you had the current kind of situation, war became very likely. So this is something I would consider when I structure my investment portfolio.
Do you think China and Russia would coordinate attacks on their particular favorite targets, Ukraine and Taiwan? If they attack at the same time, what could anybody do?
Could be, but I don't think that Russia wants to attack Ukraine, and I don't think that China wants to attack Taiwan. But Russia rightly doesn't want NATO to establish missile bases in Ukraine and Ukraine to be part of NATO. It's as simple as that. The U.S. wouldn't like Chinese missile bases in the Caribbean. We had once the effort by Russia to build a missile base in Cuba, and it almost led to a world war, which was averted. And so my view is the U.S. is unreasonable in its view, in its geopolitical views. And if you look at Ukraine, when did the problem start? Approximately a year ago. Why? Because at the State Department in number 3 position is a person called Victoria Nuland. She was the one already before in charge of Eastern Europe and created problems in Ukraine. She belongs to the neocons that want war because war is a business. That's why they were in Afghanistan. What did they achieve in Afghanistan? If I'm not wrong, I think the Canadians also sent some soldiers to to Afghanistan.
Your opinion on these world hotspots and the way they were withdrawn from the U.S. since the Second World War, I don't think has won anything. Korea was a draw. They didn't win Vietnam. They didn't win Afghanistan. They're losing badly in Iraq. Why is the U.S. so good at launching initial military attacks and then horrible at trying to bring a successful peace around?
Yes, that's correct. They're very good at dropping bombs and then dismissing these actions and not taking responsibility for it. I just yesterday read again an article which was published in 2006 about the quantity of Agent Orange that was dropped on top of Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos, and the damages that it still causes today in terms of babies that are born with huge deformations, and there are also babies born with these deformations that are grandchildren of American soldiers that were affected by Agent Orange. So the U.S., they wash away their responsibility.
Is the best thing in the world for the U.S. to stop trying to intervene in foreign countries?
In my opinion, yes. But this is not the view of the U.S. The view of the U.S. is that they are responsible for world peace and that they need to intervene everywhere and that they should control the world. And this is not the view of China. China doesn't care whether the U.S. controls Latin America or Mexico or whatnot, but they do not want the U.S. to control Asia. That everybody has to realize. Russia doesn't want to be controlled by America. But the woke EU, they don't mind, because they're all socialists.
If you had a choice of what kind of government we should have, how would it be set up and who should be in control?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think you just say that democracy is the best is an unproven statement. We are in an experimental stage. Never in 5,000 years of recorded human history did we have democracy, did we have social security, the pension fund system, and so forth and so on. These are experiments. Personally, I don't think that everybody should be voting. First of all, if you live in a small village, I can see that everybody in that village should be voting for affairs that concern the village. In other words, if you have built a school or a local theater, I think the people should have a say in it. But if you don't pay any federal income tax, I don't think that you should pay or that you should be able to vote for things that concern the federal government. So I believe that the Chinese communist system, the Communist Party, which is not at all communist, it is about a power institution, how to govern a country as the size of China, that the 100 million Chinese who are in the Communist Party are a little bit the better educated people. And within the party, they have, of course, votes of who gets upstairs and so forth. Anyway, I think that system, or the way democracy was in Britain in the 19th century, only very few people could vote. Same in Greece, in the old Greece, when democracy was introduced. I don't think that everybody should be voting. I think it should be limited to some people.
A means test or a test on current affairs, people who are aware of what's going on, maybe?
Well, I'm an economist. I'm not a politician. But my view is that so far, the democracies have produced some of the worst governments that one can imagine. If you have a monarchy or a feudal system, if one of the feudals did poorly, the people rebelled and chopped off his head. But whose heads do you want to chop off in Washington, D.C.? They all hide behind they say, well, I was under the order to do so, or we did it to protect you, or they twist things around. So we have all these commissions that look into kind of irregularities. They never come to a conclusion, and they hardly ever send any politician to jail. That is another thing. So nobody is ever responsible in a democracy. And to chop off the heads of all the government leaders in a democracy, you would have to chop off the heads. In Western countries nowadays, the government accounts for 50% of the economy. You would have to chop off the heads of millions of people, billions.
With rampant inflation, is there anything people on fixed incomes can do to protect themselves?
Well, they can buy, but it's a limited protection, inflation index bonds, but they have very low yield. I'd say if you believe that inflation will be high, one way is to buy equities with a relatively high dividend yield as a substitute for your bond portfolio. That's what I do. In America, I don't know about Canada, but in America you have real estate investment trusts. That protects you to some extent against inflation.
In Canada and the U.S., housing affordability is a big issue. Is there anything that would help housing affordability? All governments seem to do is think that taxes like an empty home tax, a speculation tax, a foreign buyer's tax are the solutions. They haven't worked. Taxes rarely are the solution to anything, are they?
These are interventions into a free market, and if properties are unaffordable, please write a letter to your central bank and tell them that the artificially low interest rates have created this situation. You understand? Once you start to intervene in an economy, you have to intervene again. And again, and again, and you create with this intervention more problems. In a free market, property prices wouldn't be this high because interest rates would be much higher.
Mark, your overall view then of what's happening with the world economy and how people like yourself and myself can survive it?
Well, I think there's a difference between stocks making new highs and the economy being healthy. That I hope everybody can see. And there's a difference between what is good for 3% of the population, the ultra-rich, and what is good for the typical household, namely 90% of the economy. And in terms of investments, as I always said, you need diversification into real estate, into stocks, into some bonds, and into cash, and into precious metals, and maybe some cryptocurrencies, but you need this diversification, and then you need a geographical diversification where you have some assets in Canada, and some assets in maybe China, and some assets in Russia, but you need to have these assets not through a custody in Canada, but through a custody in those respective countries. Only then do you have a real diversification.
Overall, are you seeing gloom, boom, or doom ahead?
For ordinary people and for people that are used or the baby boomers that grew up in an environment where there was more and more freedom, this kind of lifestyle will not come back. I think everything will be more difficult, it will be more regulated, and people will enjoy less freedom, and the government will have more influence on people's lives. They will say, well, if you want social security or a pension, you have to get vaccinated. If not, you're not going to get this, and so forth and so on. And if you want to travel, you have to do this and you have to do that. Life will become more difficult. That's no doubt. And you mentioned before affordability. Young people today, this is statistically proven by the government, by the Federal Reserve. They have these statistics and they publish them. Someone at 35 years old of age today has less money than his parents had at 35 years of age, and he earns less than his parents earned at 35 years of age, inflation adjusted by the inflation rate the government publishes, which is much lower than the true inflation rate. But these are facts. So when you ask me, is it gloom or boom, what you can have is boom in one sector of the economy, like the stock market, such as we had, and gloom in the real world.
Mark, how can people find out more about the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report?
Well, they can go to our website, gloomboomdoom.com, and they can see the different options of reports they would like to subscribe to.
Mark, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Well, you're most welcome, and I wish your listeners a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and a healthy New Year. And especially, as I said, Merry Christmas, because in a few years' time, under the influence of the politically correct, dumbed down, woke population, maybe you're not allowed to say Merry Christmas anymore.
Well, apparently we're not allowed to call our mother's mum anymore. We're supposed to call them my birthing person.
The last person who tried to change the language was Robespierre in France. His head also fell.
Thanks again, Mark.
You're welcome. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
My guest has been Dr. Marc Faber, publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report. He was speaking to us from Chiang Mai, Thailand. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank Dr. Marc Faber for being on the show, and thank you for listening. If you have any questions for Mark or any of our other guests or for the show, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. Now stand by for a company showcase update from American Manganese President Larry Reaugh. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of House Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen. Welcome to Company Showcase, an advertising feature on HouseStreet.com.
I'm Jim Goddard. I'm speaking with Larry Reaugh, CEO and President of American Manganese. Welcome back to the show, Larry.
Thank you, Jim.
Larry, you had a news release this week. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that was on December the 7th. We announced the granting of a patent by the Indian government. And that was a big kudo for us. It seemed to have a good effect on the market. We pretty much moved up about 50% until today. And, we're back to patents again. We talked about filing a whole bunch more patents last week. We'll probably end up at the end of next year with somewhere around, I'd have to say, 15 to 20 patents, and a lot of companies don't have patents. We beat everybody to the punch on the reagents we use to get those patents, and they're novel, and they have been basically examined by third parties that are peer examiners, and they've agreed that the patent does work. So for those out there that poo-poo patents, I think they should take a second look at just exactly what patents will mean down the road. I mean, these battery companies and these EV companies don't go for thousands of patents because they're worthless, and we're not going for patents because they're worthless. And the question came in, earlier in the week about just what does it cost for a patent. Well, if you want the direct cost, just the cost of filing the patent and the fees and everything else, it's somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 each. So it's not a cheap process, but the big money spent on the front end when you're doing the R&D and proving that the patent works, and that's where the big money comes into it. So we're happy with our patents, and I think the shareholders should be. We're striving hard to become the final solution for a circular economy, so to speak, with nothing going back into the environment and getting close to 100% recoveries and purities out of the work that we do. So, and that's going to move rather quickly here pretty soon. And that work, we hopefully will have a release coming out telling everybody where we're at and what we're doing. And that's the next big step. In the meantime, the next one, of course, is doing all that work to put everything together and make a circular and continuous flow of material. And so that's a test we do before we decide to commercialize. So anyway, Jim, that's looking really good, and it goes without saying that the last podcast we had, in which we disclosed that there are reports on the short positions from the predator traders, which everybody was denying on the boards. And, that I was, seeing things or inventing stories, and now it's proven that, hey, I wasn't inventing them. So that's another good thing. That puts everybody on notice. It also, basically exposes the predators for what they are. So, I wasn't even going to mention the name this time around, but, they did slap me down again today. That may have been some ordinary selling too, but certainly it was. There was a lot of selling that was going on through the predators, and that's always very telling by the speed at which some of these sales go through. In a second, you can get 5 to 20 sales in 1 second going through on lots, and so that tells you there's a computer involved. Anyway, it's been a good week. We've certainly gained back some credibility in the market, and I expect to see Santa Claus rally this year, and it looked like we might be heading that way right now. So if everybody remembers last year, just before we started to move up rapidly, we were having a Santa Claus rally. So I think we rallied about 60 cents, went back to 45, and then shot back up. And pretty much over the next few weeks, we went up to 285. So a lot of people made a lot of money. A lot of people lost money. I mean, somebody was buying, somebody was selling. And unfortunately, I think it was probably the predators made a lot of money this go around. They're coming back down because something brought it back down, and certainly wasn't the fact that we have a circular solution for recycling lithium-ion batteries. That was not the cause of it, although they tried to make it look like it was. It was strictly gung-ho predator trading. I've attached an article in here where the U.S. is doing a big examination on the predator trading down there, and how harmful it could potentially be. And there's always the argument that you got to have some predator trading to keep the markets on keel. And I agree with that, but, and there's no shares around to hold the market back from a lofty run. Maybe somebody should be shorting into the market to keep it a more rational market. But that's the case here in Canada. Of course, we don't have a short rule. So, like I say all the time, it's the Wild West up here. And this attracts a lot of the big players to be shorting stocks, and they're doing it to just about everybody. Just about anything out there is getting shorted day in and day out, day in and day out. And but that will pass. And like I say, I think we're going to have a Christmas rally. A lot of things that we've been waiting for, due to long lead items and COVID and transportation, and all of these things have ganged up in the last few months to slow everything down for us anyway on getting the demonstration plant started. So that should be all solved soon, and then we'll have something out on it. But until then, I wish everybody a great weekend, and thank you for the support. I got a lot of support on emails, and people that realize that a lot of this blather on the BBs and the CEO boards is really just blather and misleading. So that's that, Jim, and you have a good weekend too.
Larry, for people new to American Manganese, can you give us a brief description of the company and where you're traded?
Well, the company's traded, first of all, it's a critical metals company that developed a process which is patented in 5 countries for treating very low grades of manganese and a special type of ore, and being able to get high recoveries and produce electrolytic manganese metal and electrolytic manganese dioxide, which is used in batteries. So that said and done, the Chemetco group recognized that, this thing should work on cobalt and nickel and all the other chemistries out there. So we did a proof of concept, never looked back. We got close to 100% recoveries and purities on that proof of concept, and all we've done is prove it up and innovate it to the point where we're almost through all that kind of testing, and we'll have a good product which will fetch more at the market than the ordinary salts will, and certainly this will move us into a position where I imagine that we will probably be pursued next year by some of the electric car vehicle manufacturers that are having problems with some of the batteries that they're putting into their machines that produces scraps. So anyway, we're traded on the USD board under the symbol AMYZF, and we're traded in Frankfurt under the symbol 2AM. We have a lot of transparency in our company in which we talk about recoveries and we talk about advancements, we talk about innovation, and that can be all found on our website at AmericanManganeseInc.com. If you want, you can phone me here at 778-574-4444, or you can send us an email at LREAUGH@AMYMN.com.
Larry, thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Larry Reaugh, CEO and President of American Manganese. I'm Jim Goddard. Our conversation took place on December 10th.
Comments made on Company Showcase are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at HowStreet.com. Company Showcase is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.